Welcome back. Joining me are my regular panellists in Western Australia, Liberal Senator Matthias Corman. Thanks for joining us. And in the studio with me, Labor Senator Matt Thistlethwaite. And Matt, I want to go to you first because you're just back from a trip, a bipartisan trip, courtesy of our Defence Forces to Afghanistan to visit our troops in the field. A big day again for Afghanistan. Our colleagues in New Zealand, our ANZAC colleagues, burying two of their soldiers killed in Afghanistan some days ago. So the tragedy is ongoing there in terms of lives lost by coalition forces. But what did you make of progress that's being made in Afghanistan at the moment?
Well, I was blown away by the positive work that Australians are producing in Afghanistan. Not only our troops who are working on counterinsurgency with the Afghan National Army, they're providing training for Afghan nationals there. The AFP are working to train the national police and the local police to establish a Western-style law and order system there. And then you've got fantastic Australians from AusAid, from DFAT, who are doing work on the Save the Children funding, building schools, building hospitals, building roads. And of course you've got wonderful Australian doctors and nurses who are working in the hospitals, not only working on injured soldiers but also training Afghan nationals in midwifery and basic surgery. So Australians are doing such great work there, Chris, and you just cannot get a handle on the magnitude of that work until you actually go there and visit it and see what we're doing firsthand.
Yeah, Matthias Corman, we don't hear enough about the positive news out of Afghanistan, the sacrifices made by our defence personnel. We've got bipartisan support for this commitment, and of course today especially, not to forget our brothers across the Tasman in New Zealand.
Look, our troops are doing a very important job in Afghanistan for us, and it does have very strong bipartisan support, as you say. I mean, it is a very important job that we're doing, making sure that Afghanistan never ever will be a breeding and training ground for terrorism again, and of course supporting our allies around the world. Look, I mean, and like Matt has said, I mean, it is important for us to show our support, but from time to time by visiting that particular region and actually seeing firsthand what wonderful work Australians are doing on the ground in Afghanistan.
Okay, well, Federal Parliament, as I mentioned before, does resume this week. Hostilities resume in the nation's capital. Julia Gillard, back from holidays, has opened up a new line of attack against the states over power prices. Here's what she had to say during the week.
At the moment, there is an incentive for state governments that reap dividends from power assets to keep investing in the poles and wires, to over-invest in the poles and wires. Because the more they invest in the poles and wires, then the greater the dividends they get. So let's look here in New South Wales, a 70% increase in prices over the last 4 years. That's separate to carbon pricing, and we've seen a 60% increase in the dividends that the state government gets.
Interestingly, in my interview you've just seen with Malcolm Turnbull, he agrees with a large part of what Julia Gillard says there about the state governments and their role in power prices. But Tony Abbott, he wants to keep it all about the carbon tax.
The Prime Minister's carbon tax. Now, she knows there's a problem. That's why she's running around the countryside trying to blame everyone but herself. She never said there was a problem for 5 years of government. Now she's suddenly saying that it's everyone's fault but hers. Let the public be aware. It is the carbon tax which is what's putting up everyone's power prices, because that's exactly what it is supposed to do.
Matthias Corman, who's right there, Tony Abbott or Malcolm Turnbull?
Well, I mean, they're both right, of course. Julia Gillard is a bit like a bank robber calling the cops to divert attention from what they've just done. I mean, Julia Gillard, of course, deliberately and intentionally has been pushing up the cost of electricity through the carbon tax. Julia Gillard wants the cost of electricity to go up so that people use less electricity. I mean, that is self-evident. Now, I mean, in relation to the issue of what happens at a state level, we've got to remember that network charges are actually regulated by a federal regulator, and there's no doubt that if Julia Gillard was so concerned about what was happening, she actually did have some tools at her disposal to take action there, but of course she hasn't. There's a world of difference, Chris, between increasing electricity charges to make sure you can keep the lights on, to keep investing in the necessary infrastructure to keep electricity generation going on one hand, and the self-inflicted, non-productive additional cost that comes from the carbon tax, which of course will not make any difference to the environment. The problem we've got at a state level, and I had a conversation with Colin Barnett about this here in Western Australia yesterday, this issue of gold-plated investment in infrastructure is actually an issue that Campbell Newman raised with Julia Gillard at the last COAG meeting, and she of course now has just jumped on this. I mean, Campbell Newman was saying to Julia Gillard, if you want to...
It certainly is an issue that's been around for a while, Matthias Corman, and the state governments have been dealing with it. I just want to go to Matt Thistlethwaite, and of course this issue of power prices has been around for a long while, but is Julia Gillard not mad making this the central national political issue when she is introducing a carbon tax that, whatever you say about the state impacts on power prices, we all know that the carbon tax is going to add an additional at least 10% increase on power prices?
Well, the Prime Minister's brought this issue back onto the agenda because Tony Abbott and the Coalition have been running this crazy, misleading campaign for the last 6 months, saying that the increases in power prices that people have been suffering have been because of the carbon price, when the policy hadn't even started yet. Now, how logically can you blame the carbon price when the policy had not started, Chris?
That's what it's all about.
Sensible people in the Coalition, like Malcolm Turnbull, like the Energy Minister in New South Wales, Chris Hartcher, know the reason behind the increase in power prices in New South Wales, and Malcolm mentioned it. It's gold plating of the poles and wires in the system in New South Wales and increasing reliability. That's the reason why power prices have been increasing, not the carbon price. The carbon price is out there, 10%. It's been modelled. People know what the cost is going to be.
The whole point of the carbon tax is to push up the cost of electricity. I mean, come on, get off it, Matt.
Yeah, but Matthias, that's been modelled, and we've been upfront with people about that. There's been a 50% increase in carbon price in the cost of electricity in New South Wales over the last couple of years, and that's all been because of network
and another
upgrades
10%
by
on
state
top
governments.
Of it, courtesy of the
and they're
carbon
given
tax.
what, a $45 rebate? I mean, come on, Matthias. Who do you back? Who do you back? Crazy Tony Abbott's campaign or sensible Malcolm Turnbull's approach?
I back up getting rid of the carbon tax.
Are you saying that consumers should not be concerned about the 10% increase in power prices from the carbon tax?
Look, there's a reason behind the carbon price. We've outlined that to the Australian public, and it's been modelled. And we've said that the average cost impost will be about $3.30. Consumers will get $10.10 in compensation from the federal government through the assistance package to compensate from that. You're not getting the same level from the state governments in their rebate for the increase in power prices that have been undertaken.
We're clearly going to hear a lot more about this when Parliament resumes next week. Obviously, both sides of politics are very concerned about your power bills, but they have something of a dispute going about who's to blame for it. We'll certainly talk about this more in the future. I just want to go to another topic today. Of course, the Olympics have been on all week, and initially quite a bit of disappointment about Australia's performance, and yet some people have been blaming that on a lack of government funding. Here's the Sports Minister, Kate Lundy.
Sport funding in Australia is at record levels, both at the high performance end and the preparation for this Olympics, and also, importantly, with participation. The Labor-Gillard government has been nurturing all aspects of our sports system. We understand its value, we understand the incredibly important role sport plays in Australians' lives.
Matthias Corman, firstly, I think Australia's had a pretty good Olympics. You know, you can't knock 6 golds we have at the moment and 13 silver at the last count I saw. And it's a bit rich, isn't it, to blame any disappointments on government funding?
Look, I mean, Chris, I agree with you. I mean, I think we all back our athletes. We want to see them do well. I don't think that we should politicise you know, our contribution or our efforts at the Olympic Games. I mean, I'm sure that at some point in the future, you know, people with responsibility in this area will sort of have a look back at and sort of review and debrief on what's been going well, what's not been going so well, how we can do better in the lead up to the next Olympics. But I don't think that it's a matter of political finger pointing or point scoring. So, I mean, from my point of view, well done on the Aussies, and you know, hopefully we'll do even better next time.
Matt Thistlethwaite, is there a need for more money at that elite end that's specifically spent to try and deliver gold medals?
Well, as Kate Lundy said, investment in sports in Australia is at record levels. Look, 2 points, Chris. Firstly, if you look at the history of the Olympics, countries traditionally perform their best when they're hosting the Olympics and the Olympics after that. And that's what happened in Australia. We've had our most success in Sydney and then in Athens. The second point is I do find it a bit disrespectful, some media commentators and knockers in the Australian public blaming someone for coming second and getting silver by 1/100th of a second. That's 4 years of work. They're on the podium. They've done a fantastic job representing Australia, and I think it's a bit disingenuous by some media outlets.
I do agree with you, Matt. I am smiling, though, because it is a bit unusual to hear politicians talking, whinging about other people being negative. But I agree with you, you're right. There's a lot to be proud of with our Olympic performance. Thanks for joining us today, Matthias Corman in Perth and Matt Thistlethwaite here in the studio with me. Stay tuned to Sky throughout the week. It's going to be a very interesting week as Parliament resumes and Julia Gillard seems to think she's on a bit of a comeback. See you next week.